Amina was born into a world that seemed to move silently around her, as if the very air held its breath in sympathy for her gentle soul. The small village where she lived was nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a place where traditions ran deep and the seasons were marked by the old ways. Amina's home, however, was a place where warmth seldom reached. Her father had remarried soon after her mother's death, and his new wife was a woman hardened by years of disappointment and jealousy. The stepmother's eyes held a coldness that never quite thawed, especially toward Amina. Each morning, Amina awoke before dawn, her small hands already rough from the countless chores she endured. She swept the dirt floors, carried water from the well, and tended to the meager garden. Her stepmother watched her with a sharp eye, always ready with a cutting remark that stung deeper than any physical blow. Yet Amina bore her pain in silence, never daring to speak out or complain. Her sorrow was her own, a quiet river flowing beneath her calm exterior. She moved through her days like a shadow, her soft voice barely a whisper amid the louder, harsher sounds of the village. Children played nearby, their laughter a bittersweet reminder of the happiness she was denied. When no one was watching, Amina's tears fell freely, tracing cold paths down her cheeks. Each tear was a release, a secret carried only by the wind. Her grief was not loud or angry, it was the slow ache of loneliness and loss that settled deep in her bones. The village knew of her stepmother's cruelty, but no one dared to interfere. They whispered in hushed tones about the girl who never smiled, about the woman who ruled the household with an iron fist and a heart seemingly carved from stone. Yet, beneath the surface of the stepmother's harshness, there was a tangled web of envy and bitterness. She resented Amina's quiet strength, the way the villagers' eyes softened when they looked at the girl. Each tear Amina shed was a reminder of the stepmother's own failures and the warmth she could never claim. Despite the cruelty, Amina's spirit was not broken. She found solace in the small things, the gentle rustle of the trees, the soft glow of the evening stars, the rare kindness of an old neighbor who slipped her a piece of fruit when no one was looking. But these moments were fleeting, swallowed quickly by the long shadows cast by her stepmother's wrath. At night, when the house settled into uneasy silence, Amina would sit by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the leaves outside. Her tears would come again then, a silent ritual of pain and hope. She did not understand why her sorrow felt so heavy, or why it seemed to follow her like a second skin. Yet she clung to the belief that one day the weight would lift and her tears would water something new, something stronger. Her stepmother, however, never let her forget the power of those tears. In quiet moments when no one else was near, the woman would sneer, telling herself that Amina's sadness was weakness, a weapon to be crushed or twisted for her own gain. But deep down, the stepmother feared the mystery of those tears, the way they seemed to hold a secret that even she could not unravel. The days passed in a slow, relentless rhythm. Amina's chores multiplied, and the stepmother's demands grew harsher. Yet even as she bent under the weight of her burdens, the girl's gaze remained steady, her heart quietly refusing to break. Her tears continued to fall, silent and unyielding, a testament to the sorrow she bore alone. In the village, rumors began to stir. Some said Amina was cursed, others whispered that her tears could bring either blessing or doom. But for Amina, these words were distant echoes, unable to reach the fortress of solitude she had built around herself. She was a girl who cried in silence, carrying a sorrow that no one else could see but that shaped every step she took. And as her tears fell, unnoticed by most, the stepmother's envy grew darker, planting the seeds of a plan born from bitterness, a plan that would soon change the lives of everyone in the village forever. The stepmother, whose name was Zara, was a woman hardened by years of disappointment, loneliness, and a relentless hunger for control. To the villagers, she was merely a stern figure, a woman who kept a tight grip on her household and demanded obedience. But beneath that cold exterior simmered a storm of bitterness, fed by the slow-burning fire of envy and rage directed at Amina. Every soft glance the villagers cast toward the gentle girl felt like a knife twisting in Zara's chest. Zara watched Amina from the shadows, the girl's quiet grace and the way the villagers whispered her name like a blessing igniting a jealousy she could no longer contain. She hated the softness in Amina's eyes, the way her kindness seemed to make the world around her brighter, even in the darkest corners of their home. The villagers' affection was a reminder of what Zara could never have: love freely given, untainted by fear or obligation. Each evening, Zara sat alone by the fire, her thoughts turning darker and darker. She remembered her own youth, how she had once dreamed of happiness and respect, only to be met with rejection and loneliness. The weight of her failures pressed on her like a heavy stone, and Amina's gentle nature was the mirror she despised most. If the girl was to live under her roof, Zara vowed, it would not be on her own terms. Her envy twisted into something far more sinister. She began to see Amina's tears not as signs of weakness, but as weapons, hidden strengths that could threaten her hold on the family and the village. The whispers about Amina's mysterious sadness and the strange happenings that sometimes surrounded her fed Zara's fear and suspicion. What if the girl's sorrow was not ordinary grief? What if it was something darker, something powerful? Driven by desperation and anger, Zara sought out the village's shadowy corners and forgotten knowledge. She whispered with old women who dealt in herbs and curses, learned the language of spirits and shadows, and studied the signs of magic that hid beneath the everyday. In her heart, she knew what she sought was forbidden, dangerous, but she was ready to risk everything to seize control and silence the girl who had stolen the villagers' affection. Late at night, when the household lay quiet, Zara would sit by the small fire in her room, clutching the worn pages of a hidden book. It was filled with ancient spells and rituals, passed down through generations of women who had wielded power in secret. Zara traced the faded letters with trembling fingers, her mind racing with the possibilities. She whispered incantations, testing her voice against the darkness, hungry for the power to bend fate. Her bitterness grew, a thick poison that clouded her every thought. She saw Amina not as a child or a victim but as an obstacle, a living reminder of her failures and the love she would never have. She imagined herself rising above the village's scorn, wielding a power so great that no one would dare challenge her again. And to do that, she would have to break Amina's spirit and take from her the source of her unseen strength. At times, Zara's anger consumed her so completely that she lashed out in small, cruel ways. She deprived Amina of food, sent her on impossible errands, or called her cruel names that echoed in the silent house. But these acts were only the surface of her growing hatred. Beneath them lay a far darker intent, a plan that took shape slowly, like a shadow stretching across the land at dusk. The villagers, sensing the tension but unaware of its depths, whispered among themselves. Some pitied Amina, others feared Zara's wrath. But none could guess the darkness brewing behind closed doors, a darkness that twisted the stepmother's love for control into something deadly. Zara's envy was a living thing, feeding on her fears and loneliness, growing stronger with every stolen glance at Amina's peaceful face. She began to collect tears, not from her own eyes but from the girl's. She watched Amina cry in secret, catching the glistening drops in a small jar hidden beneath her bed. To Zara, those tears were more than just sorrow, they were a powerful essence, a secret she intended to exploit. Her plan was cruel and twisted. She would mix Amina's tears into soap, a daily reminder of the girl's pain and a tool for revenge. The villagers, who trusted the stepmother and her knowledge of herbs, would use the soap unknowingly. And when the screams began, when the pain and horror swept through the village, Zara would watch with cold satisfaction, knowing she had claimed victory over the girl who had so quietly stolen everything. But even as she plotted, a deep fear gnawed at Zara's heart. She wondered if the power she sought was truly hers to command. Was it possible that Amina's sorrow held a magic beyond her understanding? Was she playing with forces that would one day turn against her? She pushed the questions aside, driven by the blinding rage that clouded her mind and soul. Her nights grew restless. The shadows in the corners of her room seemed to shift and move, whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. Sometimes she caught glimpses of a figure in the dark, a reminder that the magic she sought was never without consequence. But Zara was determined. She would not be the powerless woman no longer. She would wield the darkness, bend fate, and break Amina's spirit once and for all. In the days that followed, Zara's bitterness became a slow-burning fire that consumed her every thought. She became more secretive, more withdrawn, but her eyes held a sharpness that sent chills through the household. The village continued about its business, unaware that the quiet girl's tears were being transformed into a weapon of suffering, one that would unleash terror far beyond their imagining. And so, the bitter stepmother's jealousy festered into a plan both cruel and cunning, a dark revenge born from envy and fear, set to shatter the fragile peace of a small village and change the lives of all who lived there. The night was thick and heavy, the kind of darkness that wrapped around the village like a suffocating cloak. Inside the small, dimly lit home, Amina sat alone in the corner of the room, her body curled as if to hold in the sadness that filled her chest. The day had been long, filled with endless chores and the steely eyes of her stepmother, Zara, whose harsh words still echoed painfully in her mind. But now at last the burden of the day broke her defenses, and tears began to fall, slow, silent tears that traced paths down her cheeks like delicate rivers of sorrow. Unbeknownst to Amina, Zara watched from the shadows, her heart pounding with a dark purpose. She had been waiting for this moment, studying the girl's fragile spirit for weeks, waiting for the tears that she knew held more than just sadness. To Zara, those tears were a source of power, a magic distilled from pain and loneliness. They were a bridge to the unseen forces that she sought to control. With careful hands, Zara approached the weeping girl, holding a small, intricately carved vial made of smoky glass. The vial was old, passed down through generations of women who had danced with dark magic and forbidden rituals. It was designed to capture essence, whether of spirit, sorrow, or life itself. Without a word, she slipped the vial beneath Amina's chin, catching the falling tears before the air could claim them. The cold glass grew heavier with every drop, filled with the distilled agony of the girl's soul. Amina, startled by the presence but too drained to resist, barely noticed. Her sobs slowed as Zara quietly retreated to her room, clutching the vial close. That night, the stepmother's mind raced with visions of what she could create from this precious elixir. The sorrow of her stepdaughter, locked in liquid form, ready to be wielded as a weapon. In the flickering candlelight of her private chamber, Zara prepared the materials for her ritual. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and old wood, a mixture that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She arranged bowls filled with ashes from the ancestral fire, dried petals from poisonous flowers, and shards of obsidian collected from the dark riverbed near the village. Each item had a purpose, carefully chosen to amplify the power that the tears would carry. At the center of the altar, Zara placed the vial, now glowing faintly with an eerie light. She whispered an ancient chant, the words a weaving of forgotten languages that filled the room with a low hum. The magic stirred, wrapping around the vial like a living thing, pulling the essence of sorrow from the liquid and binding it to the materials around it. Slowly, the ritual began to shape the soap, opaque, white and cold, yet pulsating with the silent screams of the captured tears. Zara's hands moved with practiced precision, mixing the ingredients until the soap solidified into bars that seemed to shimmer under the candle's flame. The tears were no longer just liquid. They had become a vessel of pain and power, imbued with a curse that Zara intended to unleash upon the village. As she held the first bar, a cruel smile touched her lips. She imagined the villagers, men, women, and children, washing their hands with the soap, their skin absorbing the sorrow trapped inside. She pictured their screams when the curse took hold, the misfortune that would sweep through the village like a storm, tearing apart the fragile bonds that held their lives together. But Zara was careful, knowing that such power was not without risk. The tears belonged to Amina, and with them came a piece of her spirit. To wield this magic, Zara would have to keep the secret close, shielded from the prying eyes of the villagers and the wary hearts of those who might suspect her dark dealings. The next morning, Zara presented the soap to the village as a gift, a token of cleanliness and care. She spoke of the soap's gentle properties, its ability to cleanse not only the body but also the spirit. The villagers, trusting and unaware, accepted the gift eagerly, grateful for the kindness from a woman who so rarely showed softness. 4 days the soap was used in every home. But soon, whispers of strange occurrences began to ripple through the village like a chill wind. Children screamed in the night, their dreams haunted by shadows that moved without form. Elders fell ill with unexplained fevers, and the crops, once healthy and strong, began to wither under an unseen blight. The air grew thick with unease and fear settled in the hearts of the people. Zara watched these events unfold with a cold satisfaction, though she masked it behind a veil of concern. She knew the curse was working. Her twisted plan was unfolding just as she had envisioned. Yet, deep inside, a small part of her wondered if she had truly grasped the full force of the darkness she had unleashed. Meanwhile, Amina remained unaware of the power trapped within the soap made from her tears. She continued to move quietly through the village, her sorrow growing heavier with each passing day, unaware that her pain was now a weapon turned against those around her. The stepmother's envy had transformed into a weapon of terror, and the village was caught in the crossfire of a bitter, magical battle that had only just begun. The balance between light and darkness shifted with every bar of soap used, and the threads of fate tightened around Amina, Zara, and the villagers. The first tear harvest was complete, but its consequences would ripple far beyond a single night of sorrow, changing lives, unraveling trust, and setting the stage for a storm that none could escape. The morning sun rose over the village with a deceptive calm, casting warm golden light on the narrow dirt paths and humble huts. On this day the village seemed to breathe as it always did, children playing near the wells, women gathering at the marketplace and men tending to the fields. But beneath this ordinary facade, something sinister was already stirring. The cursed soap, wrapped in plain cloth and gifted by the stepmother Zara, had quietly made its way into nearly every home. It sat on shelves beside bowls and basins, waiting for its moment. At first no one thought much of the new soap. Its scent was faint, a peculiar blend of wildflowers and earth, but nothing unpleasant. The villagers began to use it in their daily washing routines, scrubbing hands and faces, trusting in Zara's words that this soap was a blessing. But soon the first screams shattered the morning's peace. Old Mama Lella was the first to cry out. She had taken the soap to wash her wrinkled hands before preparing the morning meal. As the water touched the soap, a strange chill crawled up her arms, like cold fingers tracing icy paths beneath her skin. Suddenly she clutched her head, her eyes wide with terror, and let out a scream so piercing it echoed through the village. Neighbors rushed to her side, but no one could understand what had caused the sudden agony. Mama Lella's skin was flushed, her breaths ragged, and her trembling hands seemed to reach for something unseen. She babbled about shadows creeping along the walls and voices whispering threats only she could hear. The village healer was called, but even the oldest remedies failed to calm her. Then it spread. In the following days, more villagers began to suffer inexplicable torment. Children woke screaming from nightmares filled with faceless figures chasing them through endless forests. Farmers found their crops blackened by frost despite the warmth of the sun. Birds fell dead from the skies without cause. A heavy dread settled over the community, thick and suffocating like a heavy fog. The soap was at the heart of it all, though no one yet realized its role. Families gathered to discuss the strange events, voices hushed and anxious. Some whispered that the village was cursed for reasons they could not comprehend. Old stories of vengeful spirits and ancient magic were recalled in frightened tones. But no one suspected the stepmother. How could they? Zara's public face was one of concern, offering prayers and blessings while secretly watching the chaos unfold with a twisted satisfaction. The stepmother's envy had transformed into a weapon far more powerful than any harsh word or cold stare. At the market the whispers grew louder. It is the work of the spirits, some said. The village has angered the ancestors. Others believed a jealous sorcerer had cast a spell. But none dared voice the truth. None could imagine that the curse came from within their own midst, wrapped in a bar of soap. Amina, unaware that her tears had been harvested and transformed into this cursed object, continued her quiet life. Her heart was heavy with confusion and sadness, not knowing that the source of the village's suffering was bound to her own pain. She noticed the growing fear but felt powerless to stop it. She longed to help, but the walls of silence built by her stepmother's cruelty made her voice small and ignored. The village's fear turned to paranoia. Doors were bolted tight, windows shuttered, and neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. The simple act of washing hands, a gesture once associated with cleansing and renewal, became a moment of dread. Many stopped using the soap altogether, but some, out of habit or necessity, continued and suffered the consequences. One evening, under the blood-red glow of the setting sun, a group of villagers gathered secretly to discuss what must be done. They spoke in hushed tones of banishing evil, of seeking out the village priest to cleanse the land. Yet even in their fear they hesitated to accuse Zara, who remained calm and composed, offering comfort with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Meanwhile, Zara moved freely among them, her dark plan unfolding perfectly. She collected news of every new scream, every whispered rumor, storing them like trophies. Yet, beneath her cruel delight was a growing unease, a faint whisper at the edges of her consciousness that perhaps the power she had summoned was not fully under her control. The curse embedded in the soap was no ordinary spell. It was woven from the purest sorrow, the essence of a girl's tears, twisted by jealousy into a poison that fed on fear itself. And magic, once unleashed, often has a will of its own. As days turned into weeks, the village changed. Laughter faded, replaced by silence broken only by cries of terror and despair. The earth seemed to recoil, the crops failing and the skies darkening with ominous clouds. Even the animals avoided the village, their instincts warning them of the unseen darkness. Amina, feeling the weight of the village's suffering, began to retreat further into herself. She wandered the outskirts of the forest, seeking solace in the whispering trees and the cool embrace of night. It was here, in the quiet shadows, that she first sensed the true depth of the darkness that had taken root, not just in the village but in the very air around her. One night, she dreamed of a figure, a woman cloaked in tears and shadows, her face hidden but her presence undeniable. The figure reached out a hand, not in threat but in invitation. When Amina woke, the memory lingered like a secret carved into her soul. She did not understand, but somewhere deep within, a spark of strength was beginning to kindle. Back in the village, tension reached a breaking point. The villagers' fear turned to anger, their desperation demanding answers. Rumors spread of curses and spirits, but the true source remained hidden, protected by lies and silence. Zara's carefully constructed facade began to crack as suspicions grew, but she fought to maintain control, her envy fueling a dangerous game of shadows. The cursed soap had become a symbol of the village's suffering, a dark reminder that pain, once trapped and twisted, could consume everything in its path. The village once known for its harmony and simple joys was unraveling like a frayed cloth. The air grew thick with unease and whispered rumors that crept through the winding paths like a silent plague. What had started as a few isolated incidents soon turned into a full-blown crisis. The people were scared, unsure what dark force had taken hold of their lives, but one thing was clear: the old ways no longer worked. Washing, once a sacred ritual of cleanliness and health, had become an act avoided, a source of fear. Families stopped using soap altogether, leaving their skin rough and cracked, hands stained with the soil of their daily labor. Mothers hesitated to bathe their children, afraid the water might carry the curse deeper into their homes. Even the riverbank, where villagers once gathered to share stories and laughter, saw fewer visitors. The water's surface, once clear and inviting, now seemed dull, reflecting the shadow hanging over the village. The crops too bore the weight of the growing dread. Fields that had once flourished under the generous sun now lay barren, cracked earth splitting beneath the relentless heat. Seeds refused to sprout, and plants wilted overnight as if some invisible force sucked the life from the soil. Farmers cursed the weather, the land, and whispered prayers to forgotten gods, but their pleas were met only by the indifferent silence of a world slipping toward ruin. Animals grew restless, their uneasy behaviors unsettling the villagers even more. Dogs howled at unseen figures lurking near the edges of the forest. Birds circled above in ominous patterns, their cries piercing the quiet with a note of warning. Livestock refused to eat, their eyes wild and empty. The village's natural balance was tipping toward chaos, and no one could say why. Suspicion settled like a shadow over every conversation, every glance exchanged in the marketplace or at the well. Neighbors eyed each other warily, wondering if the curse could be traced to a secret sin or hidden betrayal. Whispered accusations flickered in the dark corners of huts, but fear kept them from speaking aloud. The villagers were trapped in a web of paranoia and superstition, unable to break free from the invisible chains binding them. Amid the growing unrest, Amina found herself shrinking further into the background of her own life. Once gentle smiles greeted her from friends and neighbors, but now those smiles were replaced with averted eyes and cold silence. Children who had once played at her feet ran away, frightened by the strange tension that clung to her like a second skin. She did not understand why the village's fear seemed to grow like a living thing, feeding on her own sorrow. Her days became a series of endless chores, her nights filled with quiet tears that no one noticed. She longed for comfort, for even a single word of kindness, but the stepmother's cruel eyes watched her every move, sharp and accusing. Unaware that her tears had been captured and twisted into a cursed soap, Amina carried the weight of the village's suffering as if it were her own failing. She moved through the village like a ghost, seen but unseen, a silent witness to the unraveling of the community she loved. The stepmother, Zara, continued to play her part with chilling precision. In public, she wept for the village's plight, offering prayers and blessings that seemed empty to those who looked closely. Behind closed doors, however, her satisfaction grew. The chaos she had unleashed fed her bitter envy, giving her a twisted sense of power over the girl she despised. Rumors began to swirl about the origins of the curse, each more frightening than the last. Some said the village had angered the spirits of the forest by breaking sacred laws. Others whispered of a dark witch who had cursed the land in revenge. Old women spoke of ancient curses passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The village priest, a man once revered for his wisdom, found himself overwhelmed and at a loss. His prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears, his rituals unable to contain the darkness spreading like a disease. Some villagers began to lose faith, turning instead to superstition and fear-driven magic. Talismans were hung on doors, charms made from bones and feathers were worn around necks, but nothing stopped the growing shadow. As the village's collective fear reached a fever pitch, Amina found herself increasingly isolated. Her few remaining friends avoided her, their eyes filled with suspicion and dread. Even the animals she once loved shied away, sensing the darkness that clung to her in ways she could not explain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky darkened to a deep indigo, Amina sat alone by the riverbank. The water, usually a source of life and comfort, seemed cold and distant. She dipped her hand in, watching the ripples fade into stillness. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, afraid to give in to the sorrow threatening to overwhelm her. Unseen by Amina, a shadow flickered beneath the water's surface, a dark ripple that pulsed with a life of its own. It seemed to watch her, waiting. Elsewhere, Zara prepared another batch of the cursed soap, her hands steady and sure as she mixed the strange ingredients in a worn clay bowl. Each bar was infused with the essence of Amina's tears, collected during moments of silent grief. She whispered curses over the mixture, binding pain and envy into a weapon that no one could see until it struck. But even as she worked, Zara could not fully shake a gnawing fear deep in her bones, a suspicion that the magic she wielded was no longer hers alone. The darkness she had summoned was growing, taking on a will of its own, one that might not be content to remain bound to her control. Back in the village, the tension became unbearable. Families locked themselves inside their huts, children cried themselves to sleep, and nights were filled with the sounds of distant screams that echoed like a warning through the silent woods. The once lively village was now a place of shadows and whispers, held captive by fear it could neither name nor fight. Yet, in the midst of the growing despair, a few brave souls began to search for answers. They looked beyond superstition and rumors, seeking the truth hidden in the darkness. Their journey was perilous, for to uncover the source of the curse was to face the terrifying power behind it. Amina, too, felt the stirrings of something new within her, a quiet strength born from sorrow and solitude. Though she did not understand the depths of the darkness surrounding her, she knew she could no longer hide in silence. The village needed her, even if it did not yet realize it. As the moon rose high, casting silver light over the trembling village, the stage was set for a reckoning. Fear and suspicion had grown like a wildfire, threatening to consume everything in their path. But in the heart of that darkness, a single light flickered, a fragile hope that the curse might yet be broken. The village's heavy silence weighed on Amina's shoulders like a suffocating cloak, but amid the shadows of despair, a faint glimmer of hope began to stir. One afternoon, as she wandered near the edge of the forest seeking refuge from the whispering villagers and the cold eyes of her stepmother, she encountered a figure unlike anyone she had ever seen. The woman was old, her hair silver like moonlight, her skin etched with the lines of 1,000 stories, but there was a radiant calmness in her presence that made the restless woods feel peaceful. The healer, known to the villagers as Mama Zuri, had long been a keeper of forgotten wisdom. Many regarded her with a mix of reverence and fear, for her knowledge of the ancient arts was deep and mysterious. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight like thunder rolling across the hills. The moment she looked into Amina's eyes, Mama Zuri's gaze softened with a knowing warmth. "You carry more than sorrow in your heart, child," she said softly. "Your tears hold a power that has not been seen for many generations." Amina blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "My tears? But they are just sadness, loneliness, the pain of this life." Mama Zuri smiled gently, shaking her head. "No. Your tears are the river of your spirit, flowing with an ancient magic that both protects and binds. Come with me and I will teach you to understand." That day marked the beginning of a journey that would change Amina forever. Guided by Mama Zuri, she stepped beyond the boundaries of the village and into the secret world of ancestral knowledge, a realm where the invisible threads connecting sorrow, spirit, and strength were woven. The healer led Amina to a small clearing deep within the forest, where the air was thick with the scent of herbs and earth. Here, the trees seemed to lean in, listening to the lessons of the past carried on the wind. Mama Zuri began to explain the ancient teachings. The tears of a pure heart could carry the essence of protection, binding dark forces and healing wounds unseen. "You see, child," Mama Zuri whispered, "tears are not merely water. They are vessels of life's deepest truths. When shed from a place of genuine sorrow or sacrifice, they contain a power to shield and renew." Amina listened, mesmerized and overwhelmed. Her life until now had been a string of silent sufferings, a burden she had thought was weakness. But now she understood her grief was a source of strength, a connection to something larger and more sacred. The healer began to teach her rituals to call upon this power. They gathered herbs and stones, chanting ancient words that felt both foreign and familiar. Amina learned to focus her mind, to breathe deeply, and to channel the energy within her tears. At first it was difficult, Her heart trembled with fear and doubt, but with each attempt, a subtle warmth blossomed in her chest. One night, under the watchful gaze of a silver moon, Mama Zuri asked Amina to cry, not out of pain but out of intention. As the tears fell, Amina felt a strange tingling ripple travel down her arms and into the earth beneath her feet. The ground seemed to hum with life, and the air shimmered faintly around her. "You have awakened the ancient magic," Mama Zuri said, her eyes shining with pride. "Your tears will no longer bring harm. They will heal, protect, and bring balance. But remember, such power demands care and wisdom. It must be wielded with respect." Over the following weeks, Amina practiced in secret, growing more confident in her abilities. She discovered she could gather her tears in small vessels made from the bark of sacred trees, using them to create healing balms that soothed aching muscles and mended wounds. She learned to send protective energy through the water she carried to the village, calming restless animals and brightening the dull eyes of children. With each new skill, Amina's spirit grew stronger, like a sapling pushing through cracked earth toward the sun. The sorrow that once threatened to drown her began to transform, becoming a source of light and resilience. Yet the power was not without its challenges. Each time she called upon it, she felt a deep exhaustion settle over her, as if the magic drew from the very core of her being. She knew she had to be cautious, not only for her own sake but for the fragile balance of the village. Mama Zuri warned her, "The darkness that cursed your tears is still near. It watches, waiting for a chance to twist your gift into something harmful. Your stepmother's envy is a shadow that can stretch far. Be vigilant." Amina nodded, her resolve hardening. Though fear lingered, she no longer felt helpless. She was no longer simply a girl drowned in silent sorrow. She was becoming something more, an embodiment of an ancient magic born from tears, a beacon of hope for her people. One evening, as the village slept beneath a blanket of stars, Amina stood at the edge of the forest and whispered to the night, "I will protect this home. I will heal what is broken. And I will not be afraid." The wind carried her promise through the trees, stirring leaves and branches as if the very earth responded in kind. Back in the village, the restless darkness that had gripped the people seemed to falter slightly, as if sensing the awakening of a new force. Shadows flickered uneasily, and the air felt lighter, charged with a quiet but potent energy. Amina's journey was only beginning, but already the threads of fate were weaving a new pattern, one where sorrow and strength intertwined, and where even the smallest tear held the power to change the world. As the cursed soap began to unleash chaos upon the village, the stepmother's initial satisfaction quickly twisted into something darker, a gnawing fear that clawed at her insides. She watched from the shadows as the villagers screamed and fled, their faces etched with terror and confusion. Yet, despite the mayhem, Amina remained untouched by the spreading panic. The girl's quiet resilience, her growing strength whispered about in hushed voices, unsettled the stepmother more than any curse ever could. Each evening, after the household had fallen silent, the stepmother retreated to a small hidden room behind the granary, her secret sanctuary of dark magic. The air inside was thick with the acrid scent of burning herbs and charred parchment, relics of forbidden spells scattered across a crude altar carved from ancient stone. Flickering candlelight danced on the walls, casting twisted shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. She knew the old ways, passed down in whispers from a lineage steeped in darkness. But what she had unleashed so far was only the beginning. If she wanted to truly break Amina's spirit, she would have to go further, cross lines from which there was no return. That night, as a cold wind howled outside, the stepmother began to prepare a ritual more dangerous than any before. She drew intricate symbols with ash and blood, chanting words in a language older than the village itself. Her voice trembled, half with anticipation, half with the weight of the terrible power she was about to call upon. Her thoughts flickered like flames, a storm of jealousy and desperation driving her deeper into the abyss. "She will never rise against me," she whispered fiercely. "Her power will be crushed. I will be the one to command fate." But power came at a cost, and the stepmother was well aware. Each spell she wove drained a piece of her soul, leaving her more hollow, more twisted inside. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held a haunted gleam, a reflection of the darkness creeping into her heart. The night of the ritual was heavy with ominous energy. Outside, the village lay shrouded in uneasy silence, the usual chorus of night creatures stilled as if sensing the unnatural force at work. Inside the chamber, the stepmother's chants grew louder, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. As the final words left her lips, a cold shadow erupted from the altar, swirling and coiling like a serpent made of smoke. It reached toward her, wrapping around her like a lover and a captor. Pain lanced through her body, but she clenched her teeth and did not falter. This was the price of vengeance, she would pay it willingly. The shadow whispered secrets in a voice both seductive and cruel, promising her unmatched power if only she surrendered fully. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then plunged into the void, her will melding with the darkness. In the days that followed, the stepmother's demeanor changed. She walked with a new arrogance, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Villagers who dared cross her path felt an icy chill and found themselves gripped by sudden fear. Rumors began to swirl. Some said she had made a pact with spirits beyond the mortal realm, others whispered of curses worse than the soap. Yet the stepmother's obsession was singular: to destroy Amina's newfound strength before it could bloom. She sought out old relics and forbidden texts, desperate to find a way to bind or break the magic in Amina's tears. But each attempt only fueled the growing darkness inside her, twisting her soul like a thorny vine. Her hands, once steady and sure, trembled with an unseen corruption. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares where shadowy figures mocked and threatened her, and sometimes she awoke to find strange marks scorched into her skin. Despite the toll, she pushed forward, driven by a toxic blend of envy, fear, and rage. She became more reckless, performing rituals in the dead of night beneath blood moons and eclipsed skies. She brewed potions from poisonous herbs and whispered curses that made the earth itself shudder. Her cruelty spilled beyond Amina. Animals died mysteriously, crops withered overnight, and an unnatural chill settled over the village. The people, already terrified, began to avoid her house, crossing themselves when passing by and murmuring prayers to ward off evil. Inside her home, the stepmother's heart grew darker still. She was no longer just a woman consumed by jealousy. She had become a vessel for a malevolent force that fed on pain and despair. Her soul was a battlefield, torn between the last flickers of her humanity and the all-consuming hunger of the dark magic she wielded. One evening, in a moment of grim clarity, she stood before a cracked mirror and saw not herself reflected back, but a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. The magic she had embraced was no longer a tool, it had become her master. And yet, even as the darkness tightened its grip, a tiny spark of fear lingered in her chest. She knew the shadows were watching, the shadows born from Amina's tears, growing stronger with each passing day. The thought gnawed at her. Could the girl she sought to destroy be the one who would ultimately unravel her? But the stepmother silenced the fear with a bitter laugh. "No," she hissed to her reflection. "I will not fall. Not to a child's tears. Not to a powerless girl." So she prepared once more, gathering ingredients for a final, desperate ritual, one that would bind her fate and Amina's in a battle neither could escape. Outside, the village trembled under a sky thick with clouds, and the wind whispered secrets of old, secrets of power, vengeance, and the terrible cost of dark magic. Days passed, and a subtle shift began to ripple through the village, almost imperceptible at first, like the soft rustle of leaves before a storm. The once piercing screams that had echoed from every corner grew quieter, then less frequent, until they became a distant memory for some. The heavy weight of fear that had settled over the villagers started to lift, replaced by a fragile glimmer of hope. The soap, once a symbol of dread and torment, seemed to lose its sinister grip. Amina felt it first within herself. The power she had only recently begun to understand, the ancient magic hidden in her tears, was growing, blossoming like a seedling pushed toward the sun after a long winter. She no longer felt the cold emptiness that had haunted her soul. Instead, warmth spread through her veins, a quiet strength that radiated from her very being. Her shadow, once absent, now danced lightly at her feet, a gentle companion that whispered encouragement. Around the village, those who had been tormented by the cursed soap experienced small but significant changes. A mother who had recoiled at the sight of her child's bathwater now bathed her baby without fear. The milk that once curdled when carried past Amina's door stayed fresh and sweet. Even the crows that had cawed ominously began to quiet their calls, as if sensing the turning tide. Villagers who had hidden indoors for weeks tentatively stepped outside again, drawn by the faint promise of peace. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, stories of the curse slowly giving way to whispers of recovery. People began to seek Amina out, their eyes full of gratitude and hope rather than suspicion and fear. But not everyone welcomed this change. In the shadowed corners of her house, the stepmother seethed with fury. Her fingers trembled as she clenched them into fists, nails digging into palms stained with the remnants of her dark rituals. The creeping light of the village's healing was a dagger to her heart, a sharp reminder that her carefully woven curse was unraveling before her very eyes. She paced the floor of her chamber, the walls closing in with the weight of her frustration. The shadows there no longer whispered promises of power. Instead, they seemed to mock her desperation. The magic she had fed on was slipping through her fingers like smoke, intangible and untouchable. Her envy of Amina transformed into a seething rage. How could a girl so gentle, so seemingly fragile, defy the darkness she had conjured? It was unbearable. Determined to reclaim her grip, the stepmother scoured ancient texts by candlelight, seeking forgotten spells and incantations that might rekindle the curse's strength. But the pages seemed to blur, the words slipping from her mind like water through her fingers. The more she fought, the clearer it became. The power in Amina's tears was not just sorrow, it was ancient magic rooted in protection and balance, impossible to break by mere malice. Meanwhile, Amina's own journey was far from easy. Each day she practiced harnessing her gift, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The villagers looked to her now as their quiet protector, a beacon of hope in a time of darkness. But with the growth of her power came exhaustion and moments of doubt. She knew the stepmother's wrath would only deepen as her own strength grew, and the battle ahead would demand all she had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amina walked to the edge of the forest, the place where she had first met the old healer. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the faint hum of unseen life surrounded her. She closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, feeling the ancient magic pulse in the land itself, as if responding to her presence. Her shadow, now fully restored, flickered at her side, not just a dark shape, but a living essence that breathed with her heartbeat. It whispered softly, reminding her of the power she carried and the promise she had made to protect those who could not protect themselves. Back in the village, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Children laughed again in the streets, their innocent voices cutting through the lingering tension. Markets reopened, and neighbors exchanged wary but genuine smiles. The once dreaded soap was abandoned, tossed aside and replaced with water and herbs. Still, some elders gathered in quiet circles, speaking in low voices about the dangers that lurked beneath this fragile peace. They remembered old stories, tales of curses that could never truly be broken, only delayed. Their eyes flickered toward the stepmother's house, dark and foreboding at the village's edge, a symbol of the lingering threat. The stepmother herself grew more reckless, her desperation manifesting in darker, more dangerous spells. One night, villagers reported seeing strange lights flickering above her home, accompanied by low, unsettling chants that carried on the wind. The animals grew restless once again, sensing the disturbance, and a chill crept through the air. Despite her fury, the stepmother knew the curse was slipping away, and with it, her control. Her every move was shadowed by a creeping paranoia, a fear that she was losing the battle for the village's soul. She began to see threats everywhere, in the glance of a neighbor, in the laughter of a child, even in the silent gaze of her own reflection. Yet even in this dark spiral, a small part of her clung to hope, a twisted hope that she might find one last spell, one last ritual to reverse her decline. She delved deeper into forbidden magic, ignoring the warnings etched into ancient texts about the cost of such power. The stepmother's health began to fail. Her skin grew pale, her eyes sunken, and her hands shook with the strain of channeling forces beyond mortal limits. But she refused to stop, believing that surrender meant losing everything. Meanwhile, Amina continued to grow stronger. She learned to channel her magic not just for protection but to heal, mending wounds, calming restless spirits, and restoring the village's balance. Her once solitary existence blossomed into one of quiet reverence. Villagers sought her out for guidance, and the healing power of her tears became a symbol of hope and renewal. The battle between the two women, one fueled by dark desperation, the other by quiet strength, reached a crescendo that neither could ignore. The village stood at a crossroads, caught between the lingering shadow of a curse and the dawning light of redemption. As the days grew longer and the nights warmer, the signs were clear. The curse was breaking, but the war was far from over. The stepmother's rage burned hotter with every lost moment, while Amina's power swelled with the promise of a future free from fear. In the end, it was not just magic that would decide the fate of the village, but the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of hope, and the unbreakable bond between sorrow and healing. The air hung heavy with tension as Amina approached the stepmother's house, the place that had been a source of so much pain and darkness. The sky above was a swirling mix of storm clouds, mirroring the turmoil within both women's hearts. Amina's footsteps were steady but quiet, her mind focused on the task ahead. She could feel the magic inside her, the power born from her tears, humming like a living thing ready to rise. Inside the stepmother's dimly lit room, shadows twisted and writhed as if alive, responding to her dark magic. The stepmother stood tall, her face pale but fierce, eyes blazing with hatred and desperation. She had summoned the worst of her power, determined to crush Amina once and for all, to hold on to the curse that had given her control and twisted satisfaction. When their eyes met, it was not just two women facing off, it was a collision of pain, sorrow, envy, and ancient forces beyond human reckoning. The stepmother snarled, unleashing a wave of black energy that surged toward Amina like a storm. But Amina did not falter. She closed her eyes, gathering strength from the deep well of sorrow and love within her. Slowly, tears began to fall, not of weakness but of fierce determination. Each tear shimmered with magic, glowing softly in the dark room. As they touched the ground, the tears formed a radiant pool that spread light through the shadows. The stepmother's magic hissed and recoiled, struggling against the purity of Amina's power. The battle was as much spiritual as it was physical. Shadows clashed with light, rage with hope, cruelty with compassion. The room echoed with whispers of forgotten prayers and curses, each spell casting ripples through the air. Amina's tears became a shield and a weapon, flowing like a river of healing that sought to cleanse the darkness. She could feel the weight of generations in her magic, the protective spirits that had watched over her ancestors, now waking through her. The stepmother, pushed back but unyielding, struck with fury born of years of bitterness. She summoned shadows that tried to choke the light, shadows that whispered lies and despair. But with each attack, Amina's power grew stronger, fueled by the villagers' hopes and the healing she had already brought to the land. Amid the chaos, a moment of clarity struck both women. In the heart of the battle, hidden truths surfaced. Truths about love and loss, about envy and the deep scars left by rejection. The stepmother's cruelty was born of her own pain and fear of being forgotten. Amina's strength came from embracing that pain and transforming it. The shadows around them flickered as if the very air held its breath. Amina's tears poured out, not just to break the curse but to offer a chance at redemption. The stepmother's defenses began to falter, her dark magic unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. Finally, with a burst of radiant light, the curse shattered. The stepmother collapsed, exhausted and defeated, her eyes wide with disbelief. Amina stood tall, her tears now a source of healing and renewal, not sorrow. The battle was over, but the journey toward peace had only just begun. The stepmother's hardened heart had cracked, and somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope remained. Amina knew forgiveness would be hard, but it was the only way to truly heal the wounds that had torn their lives apart. As dawn broke over the village, light poured into every corner, chasing away the shadows that had held them captive. The people emerged from their homes, feeling the weight lift from their souls. Amina's tears had not only broken a curse, they had rewritten the story of pain into one of resilience and love. With the curse finally lifted, the village began to breathe again. The heavy air of fear and despair that had hung over the homes, fields, and hearts started to lift, like a thick fog melting under the morning sun. People ventured out once more, their steps lighter, their voices softer but full of cautious hope. The long nights of screams and nightmares gave way to peaceful sleep, and the land itself seemed to respond. The crops began to flourish again, the animals grew calm, and the once restless skies settled into serene blue. Amina, once the quiet girl who had suffered in silence, now stood as a pillar of strength and hope. The villagers gathered around her, their eyes filled with gratitude and respect. No longer was her shadow a symbol of sorrow, it had transformed into a mark of protection and healing. Wherever she went, a gentle light seemed to follow, as if the very spirits she had learned to harness moved with her. She worked tirelessly, using her newfound powers to heal wounds, soothe pain and protect the village from harm. Her gentle touch and quiet wisdom made her a natural healer, and soon people came from nearby villages seeking her aid. Her presence was a balm to troubled souls, and her story inspired those who had once doubted the power of kindness and resilience. The stepmother, in contrast, faced the consequences of her dark deeds. The village elders, after much deliberation, decided that she must be held accountable for the suffering she had caused. Some called for exile, to cast her out into the wilderness where she could no longer harm anyone. Others sought a chance for her to redeem herself through acts of service and remorse. Whatever path she was given, it was clear that the village would no longer tolerate her cruelty. Despite everything, Amina's heart held no bitterness toward the woman who had made her life so difficult. She understood that the stepmother's actions were born from fear and loneliness, just as her own tears had been. This understanding did not excuse the harm done but allowed space for healing, not just for the village but for broken souls as well. Life slowly returned to a new rhythm, one marked by balance and renewal. The villagers rebuilt their homes and lives with care, mindful of the lessons the curse had taught them. They honored the protective magic in Amina's tears, and rituals were created to celebrate resilience and community. Children played freely once again, their laughter weaving through the streets like a healing melody. In the evenings, when the moon cast gentle shadows across the land, Amina's shadow danced softly by her side. It was a reminder that even the darkest sorrows could birth strength and light. The village embraced this truth, no longer fearing what they once misunderstood. The story of Amina and her stepmother became a legend whispered around fires, told to children as a tale of courage, forgiveness, and the transformative power of love. It was a story that carried the weight of pain but also the promise of hope. A story that reminded all who heard it that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with compassion. And so, under the watchful gaze of the stars, the village found peace. New beginnings blossomed like flowers after a storm, rooted in the courage of one girl's tears and the unyielding strength that rose from them. The darkness that once threatened to consume them had been rewritten, not as an end, but as the dawn of something brighter, kinder, and enduring.